that's where that's where I started playing around with the Raspberry Pi. So at first, this was all tracked on the Raspberry Pi. I had 2 buttons on the Pi. Every time that he would go and every time that he would take his inhaler, he would go and push one of the buttons, and that's how I would track that. And so for about a year, I tracked his inhaler usage, and then got to the point where I wanted to start building a predictive model with all of that data that I had tracked for a year roughly. And then that's where I made a decision to automate the email sent to the school nurse so that we could try to get ahead of that. And at first, I set the threshold very, very high so I wouldn't be bugging the nurse all day with a bunch of false positives.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my way of trying to get out in front of it, because I don't know if you've ever had experience with someone with asthma, but if we were to give it to him first thing in the morning, for some reason he would be okay during the school day and he would not need his inhaler. So that was the aim behind that. Can we get out in front of it? Can we give it to him sort of preemptively so that he's not missing a bunch of class time and assignments?
And so the Raspberry Pi, was that something that, was plugged into the wall? And so, he had to be home to be able to use that?
Yeah, that was plugged into the wall. And so it was sort of hacked together at first.
Mm-hmm.
So if he used it at school, then I would go and push the button on the Raspberry Pi. So yeah, it was a bit hacked together at first, but that's how we did it.
That's how home projects are.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then, so you mentioned the buttons for collecting the inhaler usage. How did you collect the rest of the data that you used in the project?
Like a lot of other at-home projects, non-enterprise projects, I used web scraping to get all of the data. And I scraped a bunch of different sources, government sources, private sources, weather APIs to get weather data like humidity, temperature. Also scraping government sources like the EPA to get like pollen count, allergen count, and then other sources to get air quality data like the pollutants in the air that day. And then I would gather all of that and track that along with his inhaler usage and see what were the predominant predictors of him needing his inhaler.
Yeah, and what were the prominent predictors of the data that you got? What was, the most valuable in predicting this?
Yeah, it typically wasn't like weather-related data. It was usually always like pollutants or high allergen or high pollen count data days that would really cause him to need his inhaler, usually multiple times.